I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Lura Dahlem. How you doing, Lura?
I am wonderful. So,
Welcome.
Michael, you need to ask me a question.
I need to ask you a question.
Yes,
Is there a specific question I'm going to ask you?
yes.
What's
Ask
that?
me what a #1 best-selling author has for breakfast.
What does a #1 best-selling author have for breakfast?
Well, on lunch day, I had Cheerios sweetened with Cocoa Puffs and English breakfast tea.
I love it. I had keto eggs on keto English muffins.
Yay! Well, I'm getting ready to hit the road. I had to do things quickly, so I grabbed some cereal
Yeah.
because I am heading, as soon as we're through here, I'm heading, what direction? I'm heading west to Enid, to the Garfield County Library, where I will participate in an author fest and book signing with my box of best-selling books. So I'm excited. Yay!
Yay! I love it. I love it, love it, love it. Yes, one of the things that that all the authors in the book have really understood is that a book is a platform, right?
Absolutely.
You don't write a book to make money off a book, unless you're a Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or something like that. The book for us is a way of getting the word out, letting people know about neurolinguistic programming, letting people know about what we do. So let's start with that, Laura. I love your chapter. Your chapter gives me goosebumps. I love all the chapters. But in particular, I've done some work on this myself, and I've worked with some clients with this. Your chapter is Ancestral DNA, Adventures Through Time Travel. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into all this stuff.
Oh, I had back surgery back in 1994 and ended up, I was in my bachelor's program, getting my second bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry at the time. And I ran into a retired psych nurse who was doing energy work on a Native American shaman who was also in my prayer class. And I just stopped dead in my tracks and knew in that moment, because I was 2 months since my surgery, that not only did I want this, I had always been drawn to this kind of application of healing most of my life, but most of it was in my head. I didn't know that it could really happen. And so I ended up starting with therapeutic touch. And then in my master's program, I was invited in spiritual direction to get my master Reiki, which I did. And then I ended up getting certified in faster EFT tapping. And I had been introduced to NLP when I was a social worker back in the 80s. But I had never discovered how deep it could go. And so during COVID, I stumbled into certification for hypnotherapy and NLP and success coaching and all the things I was already doing. So I thought, well, I might as well spend my time wisely. So I spent those 2 years doing the home study and then doing the live trainings and the IBCP conference. That was so cool. And so my next dream is to speak at your conference on ancestral DNA.
Oh, yay. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this idea of ancestral DNA, going back in time, I'm big into genealogy, and I've been doing some ancestry work and finding some amazing things about my family and seeing the parallels between the stories and life, and how the emotions that we have actually manifest in our bodies and how we can do that release work. I'm just fascinated by it. So that's kind of what brought me to this platform.
I love it. I love it. So I especially when I was younger, I was, I don't know if militant is the right word for it, but I definitely was that person. I felt everything was a battle. If somebody did something that wasn't the way that I wanted it to be, I thought that person was battling me. And, I had this real like battle mentality. And it wasn't until after I learned NLP, a friend of mine who's an NLP master practitioner said, "Hey, have you ever done timeline work on that?" And I was like, "On what?" I didn't even know what they were talking about. And they're like, "Well, you have this kind of pattern that you always feel like people are either, friend or foe. Like, everything is sort of separated into these two camps. And when somebody's a foe, you're at battle with them." And I was like, wow, I never really thought of that. And, what a waste of energy that is.
Yes.
Because a lot of times there are people who just aren't your people. And I used to think that if a person wasn't my person, that meant that they were against me, as opposed to just like that person's not even in my orbit. They just don't belong in my orbit. And so I went, and what they said to me was, because it didn't click, and they said, "Wait, didn't you say you're Cherokee?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, I wonder if the warrior mentality is in your DNA." And I thought, wow. And so I sat down and did time work on it, and released it. And it had a fundamental change in how I do life.
And it happens so quickly.
Yeah.
That I
Yeah.
love
It
that change.
wasn't a long process at all.
No, I love the time techniques for limiting beliefs and for this kind of work. And so, what I'm really excited about and what you will enjoy is my free gift
Yeah.
is an ebook that I just finished a couple days ago on ancestral DNA and the law of attraction.
Ooh.
And I actually went into some elements of spiritual direction that I had back in the 90s of how to kind of plot out a timeline that gives you those patterns. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I did back then, and that's what I have my clients do. And so I'm really excited for people. This is a 25-page ebook.
I love it.
I'm excited for them to go in and use some of the tools that I've described and see if they can find some of those patterns and do the release work.
Yay.
Yay!
It's so cool. One of the things I love that you talk about in the chapter, and I've had these experiences with my clients, where, for example, I had a man come in, and everybody's got kind of a primary negative emotion that is behind the root of their problems, right? We all have lots of negative emotions typically when we haven't learned NLP yet, but there's usually one that's kind of the main problem. Well, this guy came in, and after doing our full, interview, guilt was the number one emotion. It was crushing him in his life to the point where he was literally addicted to drugs.
Yes.
And when I asked him, I said, how has guilt played a role in your life? He said, he goes, "Well, I'm Jewish. So my parents guilted me." This is not my quote. This is his quote. But he said that was their primary tool. And he talked in particular about his father. His father shamed him and guilted him all the time. So I said, why don't we, I said, if your father did that to you, probably somebody did that to him. Right. So why don't we go back and release that? Not just from your timeline, but let's go release it from your father's timeline. And we do the timeline work, and he goes, "It's not just my father. It's not just my grandfather. It's my great grandfather." So we had him release guilt from all the timelines, which fundamentally changed his life. But when I followed up with him a month later, he said, "My dad is a different man." And this is something you talk about in your chapter.
Yes.
Is when you do this ancestral work, there's not just a change in you. There is a change that you can detect very often in a parent or grandparent even.
Right. That you've got two lines on ancestral work. You've got the stories you tell yourself and that the family has told you,
Mm-hmm.
which is more of the timeline work that we do, the time techniques we do. Yeah. But then there's the science of that imprint and those stories. And we don't realize that we know those stories. Yeah. So one of my notes that I've got laying here from working on the ebook says, "Guilt erodes self-respect. Do time techniques."
Man, that is so true. Guilt and shame. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, shame is just what we believe about ourselves. We can go in and change that.
And I love too, you've got a story in there. I don't want to spoil it, but you have a story in there that this DNA just doesn't affect the way that we think. It's not just about the beliefs that you have, but there are actual behaviors sometimes that get handed down from generation to generation that can be, extremely detrimental behaviors.
Yeah, Bruce Lipton talks about that.
Yes. Yeah. And you reference the studies with mice where they'll
yes.
Give mice an electroshock or make them allergic to cherry blossom. Yes. And then the babies for generations have that phobia.
Yes.
And there's no way that's taught.
And then when they're able to release it in a later generation, the earlier generations that are still living also release it. And that's just like so magical to me.
It's amazing.
I love it.
And I think the most important thing, Bruce Lipton talks about this from a medical perspective too, but just because it's in your DNA doesn't mean you have to be stuck with it.
Exactly. You don't have to have that belief. That doesn't have to be a piece of your identity. You do not have to act on it, that you can find yourself in a better feeling place and find your true identity. And I talk about alignment and being in your true identity in the in the free gift in the ebook.
I love it.
So,
So of course,
yeah.
this is part of Lura's chapter in Becoming Positively Awesome. You can get it on Amazon today. We just hit #1 bestseller status in the category of neurolinguistic programming. Now we're heading for bestseller status in motivation and self-help. And who knows, maybe we'll even get bestseller status on all of Amazon. We're right now, believe this or not, this is what Amazon tells us. We are in the top 3/100ths of 1% of all books on Amazon.
Woohoo!
Out of 34 million books or 38 million books, we're number 10,000 right now and rising. And this hasn't updated yet because this is still showing #3 in NLP, but we just officially hit #1 just 15 or so minutes ago.
Excellent.
Yay.
I'm so excited. This has been a marvelous project. Thank you for organizing this.
Glad. Yeah, there's been a lot of behind the scenes work. You know, it's a lot of people don't know what it takes to actually you know, get a book published and you know, coordinate the launch and all of these things. But it's been a wonderful process, and everybody was so you know, everybody was on time, and everybody was like really contributed great content. And, you know, sometimes in the chapter book, you never know, you get like a dud chapter or something. We literally have no dud chapters in this book. It's I wouldn't say it if we did, but every chapter is amazing. And I love it. So tell us a little bit, we got about 5 minutes. Tell us a little bit about the kind of people who you work with. What brings people to you?
For the last 12 years or so, I've primarily worked with other practitioners across the globe who did meridian tapping. Mm-hmm. I was a mentor to them since about 2011. And so mainly practitioners, but in the last year and a half or so, I have an office in Enid. I maintained that office when I moved over here, but I now have an office in Stillwater, and people are finding me through Google Maps, and I'm really focusing on more of a trauma release, teaching people how to release the triggers that are going on. They start looking for hypnotherapy, and then they find out the scope of what we can do. So chronic pain and emotional trauma have been my field. But this ancestral DNA has been pulling me, and also wealth and abundance mindset for the last few years. So those are the things that light me up. I can do a lot of things, but those when there are tears of joy from pain relief in the room because someone either can't feel bad about a trauma anymore or their physical body releases something, that just makes me stay up for hours. So
I love it.
It's joy. It's celebrating and joy.
Yep. I love to, you know, I talk a lot about finding my purpose and how important that's been for me. And I get so many people, they're like, oh, Michael, I don't know how to find my purpose, or how do I find my purpose? Or I've been searching, or this or that, you know, how do you find your purpose? And I love Joseph Campbell gave us the perfect formula for finding your purpose. Follow your bliss.
Exactly.
That's it. I found something that gives me bliss. Now, the next question is, well, how do I find my bliss? And the answer to that is you do a lot of things.
Yes.
You're not going to find your bliss sitting at home watching, you know, ER on the TV and having a cocktail every night.
Exactly.
It's which is what most people do, because they're chasing so many things that are not their bliss that their tank is empty. So it's finding those things that fill your tank and revive you and bring you that bliss. So I'm glad that you found that.
Yes, I used to be afraid of that term because I thought, oh, if I was that joyful, I would just explode. So it took a little bit for me to realize that bliss is being in that flow and just loving and celebrating the moments of life, and especially the moments of service.
Yeah, I love it. So tell us, how can people find you? Other than in the book, Becoming Positively Awesome.
And in the end of my chapter, my website is there. It's Living a Lot, ALOT, stands for A Life of Transformation. Ooh. So livingalot.com, been up since about 2010. Nice. And they can find me there, or my local folks find me under the Wellness Place, either in Stillwater or in Enid in northern Oklahoma, where I see clients in person. But most of my work is online. I have an international practice and have had for over a dozen years. So
yeah, that's the way to do it these days.
It works.
Yeah, I haven't had a physical office since 2019. And even then I had that office for 2 years and only did like 2 sessions in it. It's everybody's moved to virtual. And it's so funny because every once in a while I'll find a hypnotherapist or somewhere. They're like, yeah, my clients won't do virtual. And I was like, that's because you haven't told them they have to.
Yes.
If
And
it's the only option, that's the way they'll see you. They just think they have another option. So,
and so many of my clients have been with me since my beginnings of my certifications back in 2010. And I've done generations of work. I actually had a client fly me to Chicago to work with 3 generations of his family. And that was really cool over Thanksgiving one year. So it's marvelous to watch, especially if you're working with kiddos. I have a client who I started with him when he was 12. He's now graduated college and living in New York City.
that's awesome. I love it.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Laura.